There's a kind of strength that doesn't roar. It doesn't show up in grand speeches or forceful arguments. It shows up in quiet moments when your heart whispers, "This isn't right," and you listen. It shows up in the stillness of your knowing, when the world tells you one thing, but your soul says another. That is the power of empathic clarity. It's the ability to see truth without needing to prove it, to feel deeply and yet remain grounded. In a world that often rewards disconnection, this is no small gift. It is a quiet superpower, and those who carry it are far more powerful than they know. Empathic clarity is what happens when your ability to feel becomes refined through experience, boundaries, and inner wisdom. It's not the raw emotion that leaves you tangled in others' pain. It's not the kind of empathy that drowns you in someone else's chaos. No, this kind of empathy is forged in fire. It comes from having walked through the dark with others and survived it yourself. It's what happens when compassion and discernment meet. A super empath doesn't just feel, they see. And that vision, it cuts through manipulation like sunlight through fog. A narcissist thrives on distortion. Their power lies in confusion, twisting narratives, rewriting history, gaslighting you until you question your own reflection. But a super empath has an inner compass that cannot be undone. They sense the dissonance between words and energy. They may not be able to articulate it at first, but they feel when something is off. And once they've done the inner work, once they've learned to trust that inner knowing, they become impossible to gaslight. You can't convince someone the sky is green when they feel the truth of blue in their bones. And this is what terrifies a narcissist. A super empath cannot be controlled. Not for long. Not after they've awakened to their worth. The narcissist may be able to charm the crowd, but the empath sees the cracks in the mask. They pick up on what others miss. The shift in tone, the micro expressions, the emptiness behind the praise. And because they lead with authenticity, they don't need the narcissist's approval. They don't need to play the game. This refusal to engage is disarming. To the narcissist, it's the equivalent of holding up a mirror to their manipulation, and that kind of reflection burns. Empathic clarity is not passive. It is not soft in the way the world often defines softness. It is fierce. It is rooted. It does not waver in the presence of intimidation. A super empath doesn't seek revenge. They stand in truth. And that is more disruptive than any act of retaliation. Because the moment an empath sees clearly, the narcissist begins to lose control. The illusion begins to crumble. The facade starts to fracture. It's not a dramatic takedown. It's a slow unraveling. One rooted in truth. But this clarity doesn't come overnight. It comes after being broken, after choosing healing again and again. It comes from asking the hard questions. Why did I tolerate this? What wounds did this awaken in me? Where do I need to draw the line now? The super empath doesn't just survive the narcissist. They transform because of the encounter. And through that transformation, they become a mirror the narcissist cannot bear to look into. Not because the empath is cruel, but because they're whole. Wholeness is what destroys the narcissist's illusion. When you no longer need them to validate you, fear you, or even understand you, you take back the power. When you stop dancing around their moods and start honoring your own truth, they lose the script. And this isn't just about personal freedom. It's a revolution of the heart. Empathic clarity turns the tables without ever raising a hand. It doesn't shout, it shines. So, beloved, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much, remember this: your clarity is your compass. Your sensitivity is not a flaw, it's a skill. And when you harness it with wisdom and courage, it becomes the very thing that sets you free, the very thing that makes you unstoppable. The greatest illusion a narcissist weaves is that they are exactly what you've been searching for. At first, they're charming, magnetic, even intoxicating. They know how to read a room, how to mirror your hopes and dreams, how to reflect back to you the version of love you've always longed for. But what they're offering isn't love. It's a performance, a beautifully rehearsed act meant to capture your heart, not to care for it. And while most people get caught in the glitter of the mask, a super empath senses what's beneath. Because when you've learned to trust your gut over the applause, you stop being fooled by the costume. Empaths have this quiet, almost eerie ability to notice what others ignore. They don't just hear your words, they feel your intention. They track the energy beneath the conversation, the subtle shifts in tone, the hidden contradictions. A narcissist story might sound smooth, even persuasive, but something just doesn't sit right. The more grounded the empath becomes in their own truth, the clearer the disconnect becomes. It's like watching a beautifully decorated cake that tastes hollow. It might look perfect on the outside, but there's no substance beneath the frosting. The super empath doesn't need proof to know something's off. They feel it. This is where many get stuck, waiting for concrete evidence to justify their instincts. But the empath has learned that intuition doesn't need permission to be valid. They don't always need to catch the lie red-handed to know it's being told. And that deep knowing becomes their protection. It's not paranoia, it's perception. And when an empath honors that inner signal, the mask begins to slip. The narcissist can't keep up the performance forever. Eventually, the cracks begin to show, the moments of cruelty wrapped in jokes, the dismissiveness when they're not the center of attention, the rage that slips through when they're challenged. And while others may rationalize these moments away, the super empath sees them for what they are, glimpses of truth breaking through the facade. The charm fades, the mask weakens, and the empath begins to connect the dots that others are too afraid to see. But seeing through the mask doesn't mean the empath becomes cold or cynical. Quite the opposite. It means they become more discerning, more anchored, more unwilling to betray themselves for the sake of connection. A super empath doesn't stop feeling, they start filtering. They learn that not everyone who offers closeness is safe. Not every apology is sincere. Not every I love you is rooted in love. They've felt the cost of trusting too quickly. And now they lead with wisdom instead of wounds. And here's the truth. Narcissists need their mask. Without it, they have no identity. They rely on others to reflect back their worth, their superiority, their false sense of control. When someone sees through them, truly sees them, it's terrifying because the narcissist's entire game hinges on your agreement to the performance. The moment you stop clapping, the stage lights start to dim. The more you see, the more their illusion collapses. That is the empath's quiet rebellion, seeing clearly and refusing to pretend otherwise. For the empath, the moment of clarity is both heartbreaking and liberating, to realize the person you cared for was never real in the way you hoped. It hurts, but that pain births strength. Because when you see through the mask, you stop trying to fix what's not yours to fix. You stop shrinking to make them comfortable. You stop dancing to music that was never yours. And in that pause, that stillness, you begin to reclaim yourself. So, beloved, if your soul has ever whispered something isn't right, trust it. If you've ever felt the space between what someone says and who they are, honor that knowing. You were never meant to be fooled forever. You were meant to see through the mask, not because you're broken, but because you're awake. And the world needs more people who are brave enough to see and bold enough to walk away. There comes a moment in every empath journey where they finally realize love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-abandonment. For the super empath, that realization doesn't come easily. It often arrives after 1,000 quiet compromises, after bending so far to keep the peace that they can no longer recognize their own shape. But once they awaken to the truth, everything changes because boundaries aren't walls, they are doors. They don't shut people out, they show people where the sacred ground begins. In relationships with narcissists, boundaries are often the first thing to be tested and the last thing to be respected. Narcissists push, prod, guilt, and charm their way into more and more of your emotional space until you're no longer sure what belongs to you and what doesn't. They condition you to believe that love means saying yes when you want to say no, that kindness means sacrificing your comfort, and that loyalty means tolerating mistreatment. But a super empath eventually reaches the edge of that illusion, and that's when the breakthrough begins. Setting boundaries, especially for someone who feels everything deeply, feels like betrayal at first. You'll question yourself. You'll wonder if you're being harsh, unreasonable, or unkind. But here's the truth. A boundary is an act of love for yourself and for others. It says, this is who I am, this is what I will and will not allow. This is the standard for how I expect to be treated. And when an empath stands in that clarity, the narcissist loses their leverage because they can no longer manipulate what they can't access. The narcissist relies on confusion, on emotional access, on blurred lines. They depend on your desire to fix things, your fear of disconnection, your tendency to over-explain. But boundaries change the script. They make it clear. You may no longer use my empathy as a weapon against me. This clarity doesn't require anger or drama. It just requires consistency. And for the narcissist, that consistency is maddening because they're not used to being told no without negotiation. They're not used to someone choosing peace over people pleasing. The power of a super empath lies not in their ability to absorb, but in their ability to contain. To say, I can hold compassion for your pain, but I will not allow you to harm me because of it. That kind of boundary is revolutionary. It dismantles the entire dynamic. The narcissist may escalate, use guilt, blame, silent treatments, but the empath, now awake, doesn't flinch. Because boundaries are no longer just a tool, they're a way of living, a daily act of self-respect. And when a super empath truly embraces boundaries, they no longer feel responsible for managing other people's emotions. They stop rescuing. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop negotiating with chaos. They realize that they don't need to be liked to be whole, that they don't need to be understood to be at peace. And this shift, this deep shift, is the turning point in the story. It's where survival ends and self-possession begins. Boundaries don't make the empath less loving, they make their love cleaner, healthier, safer. Because now love is no longer about losing oneself, it's about honoring oneself. And from that place, the empath attracts different energy. They no longer call in people who need to be rescued. They call in those who are ready to rise. The narcissist, now cut off from supply, fades into irrelevance, not because the empath waged war, but because they refuse to keep bleeding. So, beloved, if you're afraid to draw the line, remember this: the people who love you well will honor your boundaries. The ones who don't, they were never loving you. They were using you. And the most radical thing you can do is choose yourself. Every time you say no more, you are not just protecting your peace, you are declaring your worth. And that, my friend, is the real breakthrough. There's something disarming about being fully seen, not just noticed, but truly seen for who you are, behind the mask, beneath the titles, beyond the charm. For most, this kind of recognition is healing. It creates intimacy, it builds trust, it invites growth. But for the narcissist, being truly seen is terrifying, because what a super empath reflects back is not adoration or blind agreement, but truth. And truth, to someone hiding from themselves, feels like exposure. This is the mirror effect. And it changes everything. You see, a super empath doesn't just observe behavior, they reflect it. Not in a malicious way, not with revenge or ridicule, but simply by standing in authenticity. Their grounded presence, their unwillingness to play pretend, becomes a mirror the narcissist cannot look into without flinching. Because for someone built on performance, image, and control, authenticity is a threat. It dismantles the fantasy. It reminds them of everything they've buried. The mirror effect isn't something the empath tries to create. It's something they are. When you've done the inner work, when you've owned your wounds and alchemized them into wisdom, you naturally hold up a standard that others feel, even if they can't explain it. The narcissist feels it as judgment, but it's not. It's simply truth in the room. And truth has a frequency. It doesn't shout, but it reverberates. It unsettles what was built on illusion. But what makes this so impactful is that the empath doesn't even need to confront the narcissist directly. Just their presence, calm, clear, unwavering, makes the narcissist squirm. Because now manipulation doesn't land. Guilt doesn't stick. Triangulation fails. The old tactics, once so effective, suddenly have no power. The empath isn't reacting the way they used to. They're not explaining themselves endlessly. They're not shrinking, fawning, or appeasing. They're just standing. And that standing, that stillness, is infuriating to someone who feeds on emotional chaos. Narcissists need reactions. They thrive on confusion, pain, and praise. But the super empath, now rooted in self-awareness, no longer plays the game. Their refusal to engage in dysfunction shines a light on the dysfunction itself. And that light is intolerable because the narcissist isn't ready to face the emptiness they've hidden beneath the noise. Ironically, what the narcissist most envies is what the empath has: depth, emotional range, the ability to connect, to heal, to grow, but they cannot access it because they've chosen image over intimacy, control over connection. So when they're in the presence of someone who has those things, it's like a thirst they cannot quench. They may try to possess it, imitate it, even destroy it, but they cannot become it because becoming it would require surrender, vulnerability, and truth. And they're not willing to go there. This is why so many narcissists first idolize the empath, then try to dismantle them. It starts with love bombing. You're everything I've ever wanted. Then, when the empath's light starts reflecting back their shadow, the narrative shifts. You're too much. You're the problem. You've changed. But it's not that the empath has changed. It's that they've stopped hiding and started reflecting. They're no longer a mirror that flatters. They're a mirror that reveals. And that truth is unbearable for someone living in denial. For the super empath, this moment is both empowering and painful. To know that your presence is enough to unravel someone's falsehood and that they might hate you for it is a heavy truth. But beloved, please hear this. It is not your job to dim your light to protect someone else's shadow. You were not made to play small so others can feel big. You were made to be a lighthouse, not a chameleon. And your clarity is a gift, not a threat. The mirror effect doesn't just expose the narcissist, it awakens the empath. It teaches them that their power isn't in how much they endure, but in how much they embody. That their worth was never dependent on how well they were received, but on how fully they lived their truth. And that sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for both of you. Because you cannot save someone who is committed to pretending they don't need saving. So, beloved, keep shining. Keep standing in truth, in love, in quiet power. Know that your presence is sacred. And when your light reveals someone's shadow, don't take responsibility for their discomfort. Let them face their own reflection. That's not cruelty, it's clarity. And sometimes clarity is the most courageous gift we can give. There is a quiet kind of rebellion that begins the moment you decide to heal. Not fix, not cover up, not perform wellness, but truly heal. It doesn't come with fireworks or declarations. It begins in private, often in brokenness, when you whisper to yourself, there has to be more than this. That moment is sacred because that's when the tides start to shift, not just in your own life, but in the lives of everyone around you. Healing isn't passive, it is revolutionary. And when a super empath chooses to heal, they become the very force that a narcissist cannot control, rewrite, or silence. Healing dismantles the system that the narcissist depends on because it calls out the lie that you were ever unworthy, unlovable, or not enough. Narcissists build their power by convincing you that your identity must be earned through their approval. But healing says, I no longer need you to define me. It severs the attachment to external validation. It breaks the trauma bond. It says, I choose myself, not as an act of bitterness, but as an act of liberation. That choice echoes beyond your own story. It inspires others to do the same. One of the greatest lies you've ever been told is that healing is selfish. But let me tell you, there is nothing more generous than a person who has healed because they show up whole. They give without losing themselves. They love without controlling. They speak truth without needing to dominate. The healed empath becomes an example of what's possible. And in a world full of people afraid of their wounds, that example is radical. It's a blueprint. It's hope made visible. Narcissists don't just fear your strength. They fear your healing. Because your healing means they no longer have power over you. Your triggers soften, your boundaries strengthen, your nervous system calms, your silence becomes intentional, not submissive. You no longer seek closure, you become it. This disrupts the dynamic entirely because now they can't reach you the way they used to. They can't provoke you into defending, justifying, or chasing. You've exited the cycle, and that is its own revolution. But healing isn't linear, it's messy. There will be days you miss the chaos because it was familiar. There will be days when you still wonder, was it really that bad? Did I overreact? This is part of it. Healing means grieving the version of yourself that tolerated what now feels unthinkable. It means holding space for the parts of you that once thought survival was love. It means honoring your past without being defined by it. The super empath doesn't heal because they're perfect. They heal because they're brave enough to tell the truth. And as you rise, something sacred happens. You stop seeing yourself as a victim and start recognizing yourself as a vessel, a carrier of light, of wisdom, of fierce compassion. You realize that your pain wasn't pointless. It was preparing you. That every heartbreak was an invitation to return home to yourself. That every betrayal taught you how to honor your voice, your values, your worth. The revolution wasn't out there, it was inside you all along. Healing becomes contagious. When one empath reclaims their power, others begin to question the roles they've been assigned. They start to feel the weight of their own masks. They hear their intuition a little louder. They say no where they once said yes. And the more this happens, the more systems of abuse, codependency, and control begin to crack. That's the quiet uprising, not in rage, but in return to self, to truth, to love that doesn't harm. So beloved, never underestimate the power of your healing. Never minimize the miracle of your resilience. You are not just surviving, you are shifting the atmosphere. Every boundary you set, every tear you honor, every part of you that you welcome back home, it matters. You are the revolution. You are the evidence that love rooted in truth can't be destroyed. It only grows stronger. And that is what makes you unstoppable.